Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh video. In this video, I'm going to be repairing this 32GB iPad 5th generation I purchased for $104.55 online. It was posted in the parts or not working category with no other description as to what was wrong with it. After I received the iPad, it powers on, however the touch doesn't function and is just glitching out. So to fix the iPad, I will be replacing the digitizer panel, which for this model of iPad is not fused to the LCD. This means it's much cheaper to repair than most other iPad models, such as the iPad Pro. A number of tools required for this job included a hot air station, protective glasses, alcohol, a suction cup, Phillips screwdriver, spudger, adhesive, a microfiber cloth, and finally a magnetic mat to hold all my screws. To begin, I'm going to power down the iPad, which I did using the hardware buttons, given the touchscreen on this device doesn't work. I could then use the hot air station to heat up the iPad. If you don't have one of these, you can just use a hairdryer or something similar. Once I think it's hot enough, I'm going to apply a suction cup so I can lift up the glass and hopefully make a gap in between the glass and the frame. Luckily for me, I nailed it the first time, and you can see that I was able to get enough room to insert a plastic pick under the glass. Now I'm going to continue heating up around the edges of the screen and then slowly work my way around. Now if your screen's badly cracked, this is much harder to do, and when you're removing and prying up the glass, it will likely break, so that's why the protective glasses are such an important thing. This process takes quite a long time, and I probably spent upwards of around half an hour to 45 minutes just to remove this glass panel. If you're lucky enough to have an iPad that the screen's already been replaced on, this process is so much easier because replacement adhesive just isn't as strong as the Apple stuff. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing because it makes the repairs much easier the second time round. Now using a suction cup does help significantly when lifting up the display panel. However, it doesn't always work. If your screen's badly cracked, you can end up just damaging it more, which actually just makes it harder to pull off the display, because it's easier to remove a big slab of glass rather than thousands of tiny little pieces. Now with any iPad that's an iPad Air or newer, it will be equipped with Apple's Touch ID system. Now this means there is a physical cable running underneath the glass of the iPad. So when you're removing the screen, it's very important not to damage that cable, because Apple pairs this cable to your specific iPad, and if damaged, you can't reprogram it yourself. You'd have to take it to Apple and pay them to do an entire screen replacement on the device. So if you happen to have an iPad that's very cracked down near the home button, proceed with an extreme amount of caution. Once we have the display lifted away from the iPad, it's time to remove 4 screws that are around the perimeter of the LCD panel, and then we can lift it up, folding it at the bottom of the device. I can then remove 3 screws and disconnect the bracket, which is actually attached to the LCD cable. Disconnecting the battery, I can remove both cables going to the digitizer, as well as that home button cable, which is taped down into place. Once I unlock the connector, I can unplug it and remove the display panel entirely. Now that we have the LCD as well as the old damaged digitizer removed, it's a good time to go around the edges of the iPad and remove any of the glass shards that might be left behind. This is very important to do, otherwise your screen might not sit flat. Another reason your screen mightn't sit flat is if the corners of the iPad have been dinted, so you may need to try and bend them back into shape, which I've done previously before. You'll never get it quite perfect if the corners are dinted, so your screen may have a slight gap towards one of the corners. Luckily, it appears my screen had been dropped face down, so all my corners were absolutely perfect. Cleaning up the rest of the iPad with some alcohol, it was pretty much ready to go. Coming across back to the old digitizer, you'll notice that I haven't yet removed the old home button. Now there is a grounding clip of the home button ribbon cable which is connected to the bracket. This will need to be carefully removed before you can remove the bracket from the iPad. So I applied some alcohol to my spudger, which helped remove the cable from both the bracket and the back of the display. Now, like I said earlier, it is vital that you do not damage this cable, and given that it's glued down quite well, this is actually a hard part of the process to repair the iPad's display. But if you're careful enough and go slow enough, you should be able to remove this home button with no issues. Now that all of the broken glass is removed, I'm going to clean up my workspace. This will just prevent me from scratching any of the parts or the back of the iPad. With that all ready to go, I'm going to install the most fragile part of the iPad first, which of course is Apple's Touch ID sensor. Now, as there was a protective film, I just lifted that up and placed the cable underneath. I could then reinstall the bracket and the screen is prepped and ready to go. So now that we have both halves of the iPad all ready to be reinstalled, it is time to match up the two halves to make this one fully functional iPad. And I'm going to start with the new cables coming from the digitizer as well as the old home button cable. Once those have been installed correctly, it's time to bring across the old LCD panel, which also has the display bracket installed on it. All I need to do is plug it in, and then I should be able to test out the device to make sure everything is still working correctly. Once I place down the LCD panel, I can press and hold that power button, and thankfully we see an Apple logo. And once it is booted up, it's good to see the touch has returned to the iPad and everything is good to go. So lifting up the LCD panel again, I can reinstall the 4 screws that hold the bracket and the battery connector in place. Giving the iPad one last clean inside, I can slowly reinstall the LCD panel. Now I had to feed through a cable for the digitizer, so that proved a little bit difficult when aligning the LCD into place. I can reinstall the 4 screws holding the LCD into place so it won't wiggle around inside the iPad, give it a good clean with a microfiber cloth, and we're now ready to reinstall and seal down the new display. I'll need to remove the adhesive from the panel as well as the adhesive from the cable which runs up to the digitizer, and finally the protective film on the inside of the screen itself. And then it is time to install the panel onto the iPad. Now I did this very slow and cautiously as I wanted to make sure that cable was sitting in the correct spot and wasn't going to protrude out onto the screen so it was visible with the iPad sealed up. And then finally I can press the display into place. All that's left to do now is to set up the iPad and give the back a clean with some alcohol as it was quite dirty. Now that that's done, I can remove the protective film from the display and later on install a tempered glass screen protector, and we're done. So this is it, an iPad 5th generation 32 gig Wi-Fi and cellular I picked up on eBay for a total cost of $104.55. I purchased a new replacement display for $22 excluding postage, which brings this whole iPad to a total cost of $126.55, which for an iPad 5th generation is quite a cheap price. Now I probably won't be keeping this iPad around. I may give it to a family member if anyone is looking for an iPad upgrade, otherwise I'll probably just sell this iPad on. The device is fully functioning, including the touch, home button, fingerprint reader, cameras, and so on and so forth. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the iPad playlist for more videos just like this one. Also, make sure to follow me on my social media, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.